Okay, so this is the tutorial for the exploded view um, in Blender. And how we're going to start up is we're going to open up Blender and we're greeted with this opening scene. You'll have this little pop-up, and what we can do is you can either open an existing Blender file here or click on New File General, right? If you want to start with a blank slate, just click outside. Now, by default, Blender starts with this random cube in the middle of the scene. We obviously don't want that. So what we can do is press X to delete and delete that after that's selected. Now, I assume that you know a little bit about navigation in Blender, so I won't go over that. But the first thing you want to do for the exploded view is we want to go up here into File, Import, and wavefront.obj. Now, your optimized models will be in a .obj format, and we just need to go find those .objs. I can go to optimization output, and just for this example, I won't be using real objects, but I'll be just using cubes anyway. But you would just find, whichever obj, and you just need the obj. And make sure that Z forward is positive Z forward, Y up, that's great, everything else is good. And then we're going to hit import OBJ. And you're going to do that a couple times for how many parts of the exploded view that it needs. So it won't be just one OBJ, but it could be multiple, right? And you can select all those and import it. And then it will be imported right in the middle of your scene. I'll do that. All right, so to continue where we left off, we opened up a new Blender scene. In this scene, we imported all our different machine parts for that one model that we're doing the exploded view. So after they're all imported in, I have 3 pieces here. Just imagine these are the machine parts. I'm going to go back and look at the 3D TLEF spreadsheet. And under the Vincent tab, if that's the collaborator that you're working with, you'll see that there are photos. Yeah, so there are these photos, and they have a tape measure just to give us the approximation of the size of it. The photo is supposed to tell us, if you're doing the exploded view, how all these pieces are put together and how they're actually supposed to be together as one object. If there is no photo for a photo where it's all together, either you can check with the collaborator or you can ask Sharon where the image may be. Okay, so let's say that we have the image and we're like, okay, cool. So all these pieces have to be combined all together. In Blender, we're just going to place them to wherever, maybe how they look like. I'm going to just say, for example, maybe they're just stacked on top of each other. So I may just move it around and make sure they're placed in such a way. Okay. So they're all put together in Blender, looks great. Now for the exploded view, we actually implement some animation into it where these pieces will start moving on its own out to be pulled apart, so we can see all these pieces separately. So that's what your end result should look like, and it's animation, so it should actually come back together again like that. So how do you do animation in Blender? Down here, by default, this is all the default workspace. If you hover over this black bar here, you can actually pull this up. Right here, this is your timeline, right? This is, or your playback bar. This is where, if you were playing a video, right? This is the how you would scrub through that video. In animation, we call it frames. You may have heard of the term, but there are 24 frames per second. So every 1 second of video is actually 24 of these little guys. Okay, that will come a bit later, as I explain. Now here on the right side, if you go into this tab, which is your properties, your transform properties tab, you can open up this drop down, which is your transform. And every time you select whatever object, they will have its own translation values or rotational values and scale values. Okay, all we're going to do for the exploded view is animate the location values or translation values, right? So quick breakdown on how we animate. We first establish the first pose or the first point of where the object is going to start, right? So for example, this object that's like stacked on top of each other, I want to start here, and then I want it to end up, somewhere like up here, like higher. Okay, so what I'm going to do is click on these little circles, all three of these, just in case, even though we might only move them along one axis. You'll notice that it turned yellow. That means we set a key, and there's a little diamond here that tells us that we set a key. Now I'm going to scrub forward in the timeline. Let's say I want it to come out, pull apart, and like within 1 second. So maybe at 24. I'm going to scrub to 24, and then I'm going to physically move this, right, along this axis. And to be clean about it, I recommend pulling it out or apart along one axis, and not just like the freeform. So say here is good. Now, once I place it there, you'll notice that these values have changed color. It means that we're about to set a new key. And that key hasn't been set yet, so you want to make sure that you click this again, and it turns back to that yellow color where it sets a new key. Now, there is a mode where Blender will automatically record the different values that you apply to your objects. So for example, so I'm going to undo here. Let's say I want to set a key here. What is a key? Okay. A key is basically, think of it like a mark where we tell the object, this is where you need to be at this time, right? It's like, think of it like a pose. So when we say something like we set a key here, right, at frame 1, we're pretty much saying and telling the object, okay, in frame 1, you are going to be here. Your marker is here, okay? And when I scrub to 24 and I move this object up here, and I want to set a key, that means that I'm telling the object, okay, at 24, you're going to be here, right? So they're just different points of positions in time where we tell the object that it needs to go. Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so you can set a key like this manually. So every time you make a position change, you can just click this. There is a recording method where I think if you click here, and this is highlighted, this means that every time, so let's say, I don't know, at 50, I move this object over here, it'll automatically set keys for everything as soon as you move it to a different area. So that could be helpful in speeding up your workflow. Either way, you just want to set a key out. And now you'll notice that when I set these two keys, when I scrub through, this piece is being animated. So it's being pulled apart, which is great. This is exactly what we want. So I'm going to do that for this piece as well. And I want to pull this piece apart as well. Oh, and make sure, though, that on frame 1, everything is keyed. Everything that's moving needs to be keyed on frame 1 to establish that starting position. So right here, starting position. And then I'm going to go to 24, and I'm going to move this down along this axis like this. All right, and it set a key for me. So now when I scrub through from 01 to 24, it pulls apart like this, which is fantastic. Is what we want. And when you do the exploded view, I recommend picking, one of the middle pieces and then pulling out the rest of the parts outwards from that origin. Okay, it obviously depends on the object that you're doing. And you don't have to do it from the middle and outwards. Let's say it was a stacked object like this, and maybe I want to actually move this object. Oh, okay. Let's say I want to actually move this from the bottom. So if this one is being keyed here, I can move this to 1. At 24, I can move this object up here. So now you'll see it moves from the top. So however way you do it, it's all up to you. You have the creative control to however you think that it's like clear to show the exploited view. But yeah, okay, so once you animate this one little sequence, you want it to be animated so it comes back, right? Because if you just loop this animation, it'll just look like it's moving outwards and then snap back into place in the beginning and move outwards again, right? If you think of it as a cycle. So what you want to do is that you want to first establish that, okay, once it pulls apart, I want it to stay in this position, right? And this will allow the viewer to be able to like rotate around while it's still in this position, okay? Because if we bring the objects back immediately, let's say like at 48, I bring this object back again, I bring this object back again here. What it'll look like is that it'll come out and then immediately come back in and then start looping like that. So it loops, but right now it doesn't give the viewer any time to properly inspect it when it's up here and at the peak position before it comes down. So what you want to do is that you want to do a hold, right? That's all that means is that you have the same keyframe copy and pasted somewhere else along the timeline next to each other, right? So when this is being pulled apart and I have this object selected at the top, it's being pulled apart here, I can just scrub through the timeline. Let's say maybe I want 2 more seconds to hold this pose, right? That's about 48 seconds. I can go, oh, math, 72 right here, and then I set a key. Right? Now you'll see this orange bar light up. That just means that there's a hold here. That means between 24 and 72, this object is actually going to be staying in the same place. See that? So we're going to do that with the other object. So that's set over there, going to 72 and key. Okay? So now it's holding. And then we want it to come back. Then we may adding another 24 frames at 96. We can actually select the first key here, Control C, and then Control V. And I just basically copied and pasted this first position keyframe here where it originally was, and I pasted it over here. So that's just to ensure that it comes back into the identical position that we first set it up as. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing to this object. So I selected the first keyframe, Control C, and then Control V, right? So when we play the whole sequence, and I can change this to go back here. If I play through the whole sequence, play animation, it'll come out, hold, and then come back in, right? And you'll notice that if we loop it, maybe there's not enough time for it to hold once it's together. So we can easily adjust that by going all the way here, maybe another 2 more seconds. Math, well, it doesn't have to be exact. I can set a keyframe there and a keyframe here. So now there's 2 holds here. So when we play the animation, it should come apart, hold, and then come back together, hold, and it's going to start looping just like that. So this is what an exploded view should look like, as it pulls apart, holds, and then comes together, holds. Now you can change the timing of this. If you feel like this is too slow, then all you need to do is just move these keyframes closer to each other, which means that there's less time for the keyframes to travel that distance to the two different poses that you set, right? And you want to make sure it's consistent with the other parts of the object. So if I only moved the keyframes for this top object down starting from 16, I want to make sure that I do the same thing to this other part here. Okay, so now the object get pulled apart a little bit quicker, and I can also move this closer to each other here as well, so they can come back faster, right? And using the same concept, you could increase the duration where how long it holds. You can shorten it so it's a little bit faster. Whatever you feel like, it's totally fine. You just don't want it to be too slow or too fast, right? But this is the basic idea, right? That's what an exploded view is. Okay, so let's say you have the exploded view done. Now you want to export this animation. You can't export as a .obj because .objs don't support animation. So what you want to do is actually export it as a .fbx. Okay. In Blender, you want to make sure that you select the parts that you want to export out. So all of them here. So I selected all of these parts. I'm going to go to File, Export, .fbx. It'll open up a window where you want to save it. For our purposes, if you're doing the exploded view, there is a naming convention that will help keep everything organized. But for the most part, you can still put it in optimization output. Let's say it's forest. Let's say there's an extra folder here. It's supposed to say Vincent. Oh, let me do that again. File, export, FBX. Okay, going to Vincent. And then I'm going to label this model as whatever the original model name is. So let's say this is workshop model. Okay, underscore. This is going to be exploded view. And then version number. So you'll notice that when we were optimizing models before, we used to put optimized model and then the version number. If you're doing an exploded view, we already know that the models already have been optimized, right? You're taking the optimized models together, and this exploded view will differentiate like, oh, okay, so this has animation, this is doing what it's doing, and then the version number, okay? So settings here, you don't have to mind too much. You wanna make sure that Z forward is positive Z forward, and Y up is Y up. Everything else looks great. And make sure that you have this checked off. Yes, so I think that's about it. Perfect. What if some part fits around another part? Janelle, could you clarify what you mean here? Like,
So suppose we have a shaft and bearing system.
okay.
So that bearing goes around the shaft, right? So how do, I mean, this, what you did was for solids, right? I mean, cube over cube.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that shaft goes inside the bearing. How do you show that?
Right, so I can demonstrate that. So from here, we'll just continue to export it. That's export. That should have the animation, and you actually grab that FBX and upload it to Sketchfab. Okay, so what Janelle is saying is, what if you had, imagine there's a hole here. Okay. Oops. Okay. Awesome. And let's see if we can create. Okay, cool, Taurus. So this is what this is what you're talking about, really roughly?
Yes.
Okay. So let's say we have these two pieces and they're supposed to go into each other like that. It's quite simple actually, like as you would logically see to it. Say these are the two parts. You want to make sure that when you put these together, they fit nicely together. It doesn't have to be exact, like so. For example, you're talking about a bearing. Bearings have this kind of like spiral pattern that goes around. You don't have to line that up because or you don't have to line it up so closely. Just do your best at it. It's okay if it's not perfect because your geometry will clash with each other anyway, right? But you want to make sure that it looks attached together. And yeah, if it is a bearing and there's like a thing in it, same thing. Let's select these objects so that doesn't confuse everyone. Okay, so same thing, we set the keys, first frame. Okay, and let's say we want this object to be off. If you want to be, fancy, what you can do, if this is a bearing that has that spiral pattern, you can actually add a rotational values as it comes off. So right now, I'm setting translational values, so the position of it. Let's go to 24. And then I'm going to move it up, right? So right now it moves up. Let's say we want it to look like it's being like unscrewed, right? So same thing here. I'm going to go to frame 1 and key my rotational values. And maybe around here, when it's just off, I want it to rotate along the z-axis, right? And I can start rotating it along here, and you'll see this value is increasing. So based on that, I can put in a whole number. Let's say it does a whole 360. Okay. So now, you can't really see that. If I zoom in, you might be able to see it better. This should look like it's rotating around. Do you guys see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can add that if you want. It does make it a little more cooler, as if it's being unscrewed and then taken off, right? But I mean, from the collaborator standpoint, not 100% necessary, I think, but it's really easy and simple to add. So that's how you do it.
And we'll be having like objects instead of the squares, right? I mean,
yes, actual objects. Yeah, this is only a representation, just to simplify things.
Okay. So in the starting, like you said, the import one, right? That thing.
Yes. So you want to make sure that you import all the parts, all the different parts into one Blender file. So you can do that with File, Import, wait for an OBJ, look for it, you import it all together.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, yeah.
Then we need to align it.
Yeah, align it all or put it together to however it's supposed to be put together. Make sure the texture is reading properly. You can check if the texture is reading properly if you press viewport. I already have it on. I think in viewport shading, this button here, what this will do is that it'll actually show you the textures that it's being applied to. Because by default in Blender, in this kind of view, everything is like gray, just so you can see the model. But click on this if you want to see the texture that's applied.
Okay.
If the texture is not applied, and this is again in the Intro to Blender workshop, and I can also send you proper YouTube tutorials for it as well, just like to learn about Blender. But if it doesn't have a texture attached, go down to, see here. I think one of these Okay, here we go. Assign a different material, and then go down to base color, and put in your own image. Yes. Image texture, and then go look for your image texture. Okay. So that's
just like ZBrush.
Yeah, just like ZBrush, just different tools.
Only like same, like, I mean, you import the textures, right?
Sorry, what?
You imported this textures, right?
Yes. Okay. That's pretty much what it is. Yeah, and that's about it for the exploded view. It's very simple. And remember, you're doing this step after you optimize all the models. And if you're having trouble uploading the FBX to Sketchfab or to our own model viewer, just let me know, and then I can take a look into it. But it should work in Sketchfab. And let me see if you have some extra time. If you guys have any questions, let me know right now. I'm just going to double check if the animation is working by uploading to Sketchfab. But yeah, just feel free to ask me any questions right now if you have any.
No, probably while doing, I might have questions.
Okay, that's okay. Cool. This will probably still be processing. Oh, it looks great. You can look at this. Just save it. And these cubes don't have a texture, so they're just going to be white. Okay. So there's no animation that's moving around. Oh, okay. So there's animation. It's just being weird about it. Okay. If you get this weird thing going on where maybe one of the objects is only moving or none of the objects are moving, just try re-exporting it. Yeah, that should help. Yeah. If that doesn't work, then I might just have to go through it with Maya. But anyways, that's about it. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Yeah.
Is it a convention that 24 frames corresponds to 1 second?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So 24 frames equals 1 second. Yep.
What if we have higher frame rate?
Are you saying by default in Blender if you have a higher frame rate because this is your?
Yes.
So by default, your frame rate is 24 anyway in Blender, unless you specifically change that. If that is different or changed, I think you can set it somewhere here. For the most part, it should be okay. Yeah, if you just open the Blender, it should be by default 24 frames a second, so I don't have to worry about that. If the frame rate is higher, that just means that you need more frames to equal the same amount of time, right? So if you have 48 frames per second or 60 frames per second, then it translates to, okay, 60 frames is 1 second instead of 24.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. If no one else has any questions, then we can end it here. I guess there's just a few things I want to quickly mention, see if I can go through all of it. While you guys are optimizing models, you may notice that there are maybe 2 .obj files in the folder that you're looking at. One that says model and model_simple. I recommend optimizing model simple one What that is just basically the same model, except there may have been extra cropping or extra optimization that Mike's automation process has picked up. So that just means it's a little bit easier on us. That means we may not have to do as much cropping or decimation. Either way, I recommend using Model Simple to optimize. Optimize Model Simple. In terms of responsibility, I think Sharon has mentioned this on the last meeting on Monday, but each of you are assigned the different collaborators. So just keep that in mind, that you guys are in charge of communicating, like directly communicating with your collaborator, and ask them any questions if you're unsure about certain specifications. Like, for example, if they need texture in some area, or if it's important to have the exploded view, be animated to spin around as it comes off. Any questions like that is directed to the collaborator.